She's been called a martyr, a schemer, and even a witch. But who was the real Anne Boleyn? Let's talk about her. Hello, my friends, and welcome back to the ABC Cafe, a digital meeting space where we discuss art, books, and culture. I'm the story architect. I'm so glad you've decided to pop in today. Today, we are going to talk about one of the most famous or infamous women in Western history. But who exactly was the real woman behind the mystery? How many of us know the story of the real Anne Boleyn? Today, I'm paying homage to one of the most interesting women in history by sharing 3 facts you might not have known about her life and her death. So pull up a cup and let's dive in. Anne was born into a noble English family around the year 1501. Her future husband, the young Henry VIII, married his first wife, Catherine of Aragon, a few years later in 1508. They would remain married for 24 years, during which time Anne became one of Catherine's ladies-in-waiting at court. Henry was caught by her beauty and frustrated that he and Catherine had had no male heirs, and therefore he saw Anne as a way to get the sons that he desired. In 1533, after 7 years of pining for Anne and searching for ways to set Catherine aside, Henry finally got his marriage invalidated or annulled by leaving the Catholic Church and declaring himself as the head of the Church of England. He and Anne wed in 1533, and he had her beheaded just 3 years later. Despite her short-lived reign as queen, historians, filmmakers, and writers go back to Anne time and time again, and I'm absolutely no exception. She continues to intrigue us, especially me, all of these centuries later. When asked the hypothetical dinner table question about which guests you would invite from the past or the present to share a meal with you, Anne is definitely at the top of my list. But despite being so well known and so pored over in media and art, here are 3 things you might not have known about her life and her death. Number 1. Her religious views were vital to her reception as England's new queen. So at this time in the history of Europe, we have an interesting phenomenon known as the divine right of kings, or in this case queens, to rule. So what that means is there was absolutely no separation of church or religious matters and state or secular matters. The church and the state were deeply intertwined, and in fact, one had to be seen as a good moral Christian in order to be considered a good moral monarch, ruler, noble person. So Anne is facing quite the competition or challenge in trying to come up as the new queen against the existing queen, Catherine of Aragon, who is a staunch Catholic, as the daughter of those very Catholic majesties, Isabella and Ferdinand of Spain. So Henry and Anne are facing huge obstacles, including tradition, the power of the Catholic Church, and the laws of the day, which stated that very few people could divorce, and certainly not the King of England. Henry had been growing increasingly uneasy about his marriage to Catherine and its lack of male heirs, possibly believing that this was a punishment from God for marrying his brother's widow. So he does something radical. He denounces the Pope's authority and proclaims himself the head of the English Church. Now, this break with the Catholic Church was instrumental in Anne's ability to become queen. Therefore, she had an enormous stake in presenting herself as a reformer of these Catholic practices, and in some cases, what she and others saw as the abuses of power by Catholic priests and others in charge. Some historians say that Anne was actually a passive Catholic who just went along with what Henry did in order to gain what she wanted. Others say that she was a really fiery, passionate Protestant who wanted to completely dissolve Catholic practices across England, and likely she was somewhere in between these 2 extremes. We do know that she had her own servants and ladies-in-waiting read the Bible in English rather than Latin because she wanted them to feel like the lessons were accessible to them in their own language, which is a very fundamental Protestant belief. And she and Henry's advisor Cromwell, before the two of them had a big falling out, were united in their desire to use the wealth, the gold, the tapestries, these valuables that a lot of monasteries had in their collections across England to actually help the poor. But Anne discovered that Cromwell was more in favor of taking that money and putting it into the treasury rather than going to charities. So this was something that drove the wedge between them. So it seems that Anne did have causes she was very passionate about. Now, where that line was in her mind of bolstering the religion that had helped her become queen, or whether she was in her own spirit actually serving God to the best of her ability, we'll never know where that line was for her. We do see that Anne was incredibly intelligent and was able to play these games of power and perception, but not everyone saw it this way, especially the very large population who still believed that Catherine was their true queen, that the Pope in Rome was their spiritual leader, and that Henry had lost his mind over this home-wrecking, blasphemous witch of a woman. Number 2. She wasn't the only woman accused of the horrible crime of incest during this era. So Anne and Henry were married in 1533, and the year after, Anne gives birth to a girl who would go on to become Elizabeth I, ironically one of the most well-known, famous, and powerful rulers of England, considering that her father didn't think girls were of much use and married 6 different women in order to try and get a male heir. Anne does become pregnant a few more times after Elizabeth's birth, but these all end sadly in miscarriages, and Anne begins to sense her own danger because Henry is seeing history repeating itself, and he began looking for ways to set her aside, according to historical records that we have, as early as 1 year into their marriage. So the love and trust between them is quickly dwindling, and eventually Henry's team of advisors bring him some startling news. So startling that we still have a lot of trouble believing it. So these advisors tell Henry that they've found some dirt on Anne that he can use to actually get rid of her. And this is nothing less than an account of her infidelity with 5 other men, including her own brother, George Boleyn. Now, a few decades earlier in Italy, Pope Alexander VI's illegitimate daughter Lucrezia Borgia was also accused of improper relations with both her father and her brother Cesare Borgia. Like Anne, Lucrezia was a powerful woman with many enemies, and therefore was subject to attacks on her background, her character, and even her soul. Both women were called witches, sorceresses, tempters of men with supernatural powers to pull them from everything that was lawful and Christian. So why were both of these powerful women accused of such a terrible crime with their own families? So incest is something that the Western world has frowned upon for a very long time. Not since the days of Greek myths and Egyptian pharaohs have people been allowed to marry their direct siblings, and accusing a woman of this crime showed that not only was she a criminal in an earthly, in a secular sense, but also in a spiritual and moral sense. This accusation of incest was a powerful weapon intended to strip a powerful woman of her threat to the men around her, and in Anne's case, sadly, it did work for a time. Number 3. She's buried in a church that Henry originally had restored for Catherine. So the accusations against Anne are upheld, and she is taken to the Tower of London to be kept prisoner and is beheaded there in the Tower grounds in 1536. Now, she makes a very moving, very almost calm speech in her last moments, imploring the crowds to pray for her and to think well of their king. So even in her last moments on Earth, she is playing this very powerful political game and claiming agency over her own legacy and her own reputation, and also probably ensuring the survival or fair treatment of her still infant daughter Elizabeth by her father. So Anne is contrasting her own rational resignation to her own death to Henry's wild anger and pretty impetuous decision to kill her. According to England's historic palaces, some of her final words included, quote, "I am come hither to die, for according to the law and by the law I am judged to die, and therefore I will speak nothing against it. I pray God save the king, for a gentler nor a more merciful prince was there never." So after her public beheading, her body was left to the care of her ladies-in-waiting. There was really no plan in place of how to dispose of her remains. So her ladies gathered her corpse and placed it in a wooden trunk that had been used in the Tower of London to store arrows. So they wrapped her up, placed her in this trunk, and she was carried into the chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula, or St. Peter in Chains. This is one of two chapels that are in the grounds of the Tower of London, and in 1520, Henry VIII decided to restore St. Peter ad Vincula, which was in ruins at this time. The interior beams of the roof are Spanish chestnut, so Catherine of Aragon, his first wife, whom he was still married to in 1520, could pray under the shade of trees from her homeland. I was very fortunate recently to attend a church service in St. Peter ad Vincula, which was very lovely, very welcoming, and a very spiritual experience for me. And one does have to wonder, though, what Catherine thinks about Anne's body being buried here. Another queen of Henry's is also here, the second wife that he had beheaded, Catherine Howard, as well as the 9 Days Queen, Lady Jane Grey. One of Henry's advisors, Thomas More, is also buried under the stones of this church. So this place is known for having a lot of martyrs, a lot of political victims, and perhaps a lot of spirits who in life were at odds with each other, and now they all lay buried in the same place in this church that was built for Catherine. So I couldn't help but wonder, as I was sitting in this beautiful holy space, paying my respects to these people of history, what they would have thought about this situation. And perhaps, hopefully, they are in a situation that transcends all of our earthly squabbles, wars, and fights. As a hero, a villain, a martyr, and a mystery, Anne lives on to this day, arguably more famous than her horrific husband. Now, was she an intelligent woman, a femme fatale, a political plotter, or simply someone who got caught up in a game that was ultimately more powerful than her? We will never know, but we'll continue wondering. So there you have it, friends. Those are 3 facts you might not have known about the life and death of the famous Anne Boleyn. Thank you so much for joining me here at the ABC Cafe. I'm so excited to continue bringing you new people, new artworks, and new topics to dive into. Please like, subscribe, and comment if you would like to engage further with the channel. If you or someone you know is writing your own arts and culture stories, please feel free to reach out to the story architect at the link shown on your screen. I've worked with dozens of authors, institutions, and companies to write communications plans, to polish their voices, and to perfect their books for publication. And I can't wait to see what I could help you with. Thanks for joining, and we'll see you next time. Bye!